What's up guys, my name is Ace, and the open beta for Black Ops 6 is now live, and in today's video, I wanted to share a list of tips that I put together based on my experience with the first weekend of the beta, just to help you get on your feet a little bit with Black Ops 6, because there are quite a few things that are different from previous Call of Duty games, and they might not be immediately obvious to everyone. In fact, even for the people that played last weekend, there may be a handful of tips in here that you could use as well. Now, at the end of the day, a big thing to keep in mind with this is it's a beta. I definitely encourage you guys to mess around a little bit, try some new things, and don't take things too seriously. You don't have to use the meta gun all the time, for instance. But in saying that, I know many people will just struggle to get into this game, and that's really what these tips are about, is just helping you better understand things, so the learning curve may be a little bit less harsh for you. And let's just dive into the first tip that I've got for you guys, and this is some Omnimovement tips. The first thing I wanted to point out here is, well, it looks really cool to dive, and that's like one of the big features they've really marketed for this game is players diving sideways around a corner or diving backwards and getting a really cool kill. As cool as that is, generally speaking, if you're trying to perform well, dives are typically not going to be the right move. Dives in this game, in my experience so far, are much more about being flashy and making a cool moment happen. They're more so just for fun rather than pure effectiveness most of the time. Now, I'm not saying there aren't any situations where diving is the best way to play it, but more often than not in my experience, I've noticed sliding is going to be the better bet as far as being effective while playing aggressively. So if you notice yourself just diving all the time and not really performing super well, maybe dial that back a notch and try implementing sliding a little more often. I think you'll end up finding a lot more success with that. On a similar note to that, talking about the settings in the game, I did make an entire settings video last week if you guys want to go check that out. But just one of the big keys I wanted to point out here is, if you're a controller player at least, consider looking at the hybrid option for sliding and diving. I just found that this resulted in far fewer accidental dives, because that's something you're probably going to run into when you first get into the game. A lot of the times I just wanted to go prone or I just wanted to slide, but I was accidentally diving, and in doing so, I was putting myself in a terrible situation and getting myself killed. With that hybrid setting, I found that I was diving accidentally far less often, and therefore I'd recommend at least checking it out. Next, on the same topic of Omnimovement, I feel one aspect of Omnimovement that's often overlooked, because it is all about the big flashy dives, this is the ability to sprint sideways. As you're navigating a map aggressively, this is huge for approaching corners. If you're coming around a corner, instead of like stopping and then like slowly peeking around the corner, which is often going to get you killed, what I found here is you can turn your aim sideways while maintaining your sprint in that sideways direction, so you're still moving in the same direction, but your aim is focused on that corner as you're coming around it, and if there happens to be an enemy, you're moving much quicker, you're going to be a significantly harder target to hit, and you'll take advantage of Peeker's advantage a little bit as well. And I've just found throughout the beta so far that this is a really efficient method of getting around the map aggressively, because you don't have to constantly stop and check corners or jump shot every corner or slide cancel every corner, not knowing whether or not there's an enemy there. You can just activate that sprint while maintaining that momentum in the direction that you're already traveling in. Now, another little tip with Omnimovement here that I've been trying to adapt to the best of my ability, this has to do with the new Supine Prone system, where when players are prone, they don't look like they normally look in Call of Duty. They can be laying on their side or their back while still being alive and still having the primary weapon in their hand, and that can be really jarring to get into if you're just used to older Call of Duty games. So the tip here is just be highly suspicious of any body on the ground. So many times I thought it was just a dead body, and it turned out to be somebody laying on their back or laying on their side, and it's really something that's going to take a while to adapt to, so start focusing on that now. Next up, a little tip that's fairly subtle but very important to know about is with your minimap, when enemy red dots pop up on that minimap, you might notice sometimes that dot is solid and then other times that dot is hollow. And this is a totally different behavior from what we're used to in Call of Duty. What this means is when that dot is solid, that enemy is on at least roughly the same elevation to you. So they're not on the floor above you or a floor below you or anything. They're roughly the same elevation. Whereas when it's hollow, this means they're on a different elevation. So they're either above or below you. Whereas in previous Call of Duty games, instead of having a hollow or solid dot, what you would have is if the enemy was above you, you'd have a little arrow or hat above their dot. Whereas if they were below you, it was a downward arrow below the dot. So technically, this actually doesn't give you as much information as the previous style of minimap did when it comes to elevation, but this is still very valuable information and definitely something you need to know getting into the beta. And speaking of that minimap, which is an incredibly important tool in Call of Duty, one thing I always recommend in Call of Duty, and Black Ops 6 is no different, I would highly encourage you to swap your minimap from a round minimap to a square minimap. And the reason behind this is quite simply, you get roughly 27% more coverage area by choosing a square over a circle, and more coverage area is obviously going to be better. Next, let's talk about guns a little bit, and at this point, keep in mind, I'm recording this video before the second weekend is actually active, and as far as I'm aware, they're likely going to be nerfing the Jackal PDW, which in the first weekend was the dominant gun. But the main thing I want to point out with guns here is, again, this is a beta. I encourage you guys to mess around with and try different guns. I know that can be a little difficult if you're in a really competitive lobby and everybody's using the top tier meta gun, but it's not like your stats carry over, and who knows, maybe there's a particular gun that isn't what everybody else is using, but it suits you and your playstyle really well, and you end up enjoying it more than the others. So mess around, try different things, but I will say, SMGs tend to be a bit more on the dominant side in my experience so far, and that's just largely due to the movement systems that are in place. SMGs are going to benefit the most from those movement systems, and it's also partially due to the map design. A lot of these maps are very cramped in close quarters, and that's where SMGs tend to excel. After that, let's talk about perks a little bit, because there's a few interesting things to point out here, and the first thing I want to talk about here is the new specialty system. This is the system where if you choose 3 perks that have the same color of badge, then you will get the corresponding specialty attached to that, which is an additional perk. And especially for players that are just getting into the game for the first time and you still are learning the ropes, I would highly encourage you to try out the Recon specialty. That's the blue one, because with this one, every time you spawn, you're going to be able to see all of the enemies through walls for a short period of time, and that's just a great way to get yourself on your feet. It helps you learn the spawns a little bit better, and also as you're spawning in, if you're dying a lot, it gives you that little bit of extra information that will help get you on your feet a little bit better. But that's just the first part of it. The second part is you get the high alert perk built in, which is a huge lifesaver when you don't really know the spawns yet or the routes yet, and you have people sneaking up behind you all the time. That high alert perk can really make a big difference and help you combat those players that get in behind you. Now, in saying that, even though I think Recon's probably the best for people that are just starting out, don't feel like you have to always use the specialties. I would just recommend playing around with them. And I would also say Enforcer is an excellent specialty if you're a very aggressive player. As for another tip I've got when it comes to the perks for the players that are just getting into the game, still learning the maps and everything, there's a certain perk combination that is extremely powerful, at least it was in the first weekend, and I don't anticipate any changes for the second weekend. And this is the combination of Dispatcher in the second tier, and this is the one that makes it so it takes less score to earn the non-lethal streaks, so like the Scout Pulse, which is your personal UAV, or the UAV and Counter UAV, which work for your entire team, combined with Bankroll from tier 3, which gives you 150 score toward your streak immediately every single time you spawn. With this combination, all it takes to get one of those Scout Pulses is literally 1 kill. And that's just a really handy tool. Again, if you're just learning the maps for the first time and you don't really understand player behavior and flow on these maps, that is definitely going to help your ability to learn the maps quite a bit faster. After that, when it comes to gunfights themselves, there are a couple things to point out with the damage profiles with the regular guns. And I'm sure many of you guys that have been watching my channel, you already know about this, but for those that don't, in this game, for all of the guns aside from sniper rifles and shotguns, we don't have separate body multipliers. This means you deal the same amount of damage to the foot as you do to the chest. And this is a bit different than many of the recent Call of Duty games we played. And this just means don't waste your time trying to make sure you line up that perfect torso shot. Just get your shots on target as quickly as you possibly can. And to top this off, when it comes to headshots, generally speaking, unless you're using the barrel that boosts your headshot damage, headshots aren't actually going to be helping you and changing the number of shots to kill in a gunfight, at least with most of the weapons in the game. So again, taking that extra time to make sure you're lining up that perfect shot to the head, don't worry about it. You're just wasting valuable time. Just hit your shots, get on target. That's all that matters. And this just leaves us with one last tip I want to share for you guys for the beta. And this is, I highly encourage you to get out there and get into as many situations as you possibly can. Again, this is a beta. Your stats don't matter. It's not like they're carrying over to the full game. Not that they even matter in the full game, but I know to some people they do. But this is the beta. This is the perfect time to be learning the maps and really getting yourself out there and exposing yourself to as many situations as possible. The more you do that, the faster you're going to improve and the better you're going to be setting yourself up for the full build of the game. And there we go. That's going to wrap it up for today's video with a good handful of tips that I think will be great to help get you guys on your feet for the open beta of Black Ops 6. And with that, I just want to leave this to you guys in those comments down below. For anybody that did play in the first weekend of the beta, do you have anything else to add? Any other tips that you think would help new players get on their feet? If so, please leave those tips down below. If you enjoyed this one, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.